All right, the 7.2 and 7.3 homework. Definitely have your formula sheet handy when you're going through this because I do not need you to memorize your angle addition, subtraction, half angle, and double angle formulas. And with that sheet handy, I think a lot of these will be fairly straightforward. The first one is asking for the sine of pi over 12, but, and be careful here, it wants you to use a half angle formula to find that. And why that's important is because you can find this value using angle addition or subtraction or half angle formulas. But if you use angle addition and subtraction, you'll end up with something that does not look like this, and the algebra involved into changing it to something that looks like this will be very difficult. So make sure you use the type of formula that they recommend you use. Half angle formula, well, let's see, pi over 12 is half of pi over 6. If you're good just looking at that, that's great. But if you struggle with that, convert this to degrees and you'll see that this is 15 degrees. And then it should be pretty easy to realize that 15 degrees is half of 30 degrees. At any rate, I think your sine half angle formula should work. Plug in all the numbers, simplify, and you should get something that looks like this or very close to this. And then note what it wants is the numbers that are in place of A and B in this expression. So it doesn't want the actual value. It's saying that the actual value will fit this form, and it wants you to tell it what numbers go in place here. And that's the same basic idea for the first half or so of this assignment. The second question, same idea. Now we're talking about the cosine of negative pi over 12. That's negative 15 degrees. But this time, don't use a half angle formula. Instead, use addition or subtraction. So, I don't know, maybe 30 minus 45 would get you there. Although there's lots of different options. Use one of those options. You might have to do a little bit of algebraic manipulation, but eventually you should be able to get it to look like this. And when it looks like this, just figure out what A and B are equal to and put them here and here. Same idea for question 3. Question 3, we're using tangent of pi over 8. You might struggle with that, but if you convert it to degrees, you'll see that that's 22.5 degrees, which happens to be exactly half of 45 degrees, which makes sense because it's asking you to use a half angle formula. More of the same down here. Convert this into degrees so that you can tell what angles you can add or subtract to come up with that value. And again, we're using an addition or subtraction formula for this one. And then you're done with the part where you want to use values off your unit circle. So I guess it's just the first 4 questions that kind of correspond with that first video that I made you. The rest of this homework will correspond with the second video that I made you, where they refer to some angle, x in this case, and they don't tell you what that angle is. However, they do tell you that that angle is in the first quadrant and that the sine of that angle is 6/7. And with that knowledge, you're supposed to figure out the sine of 2x, the cosine of 2x, and the tangent of 2x. And hint here, you can use 3 different double angle formulas to figure these out if you want. There's a sine double angle formula, cosine double angle formula, and tangent double angle formula. And that's all totally fine. You can do that, you'll get the right answers, and you can move on. However, it might be easier for you to just figure out one of these, because if you know the sine of 2x, for example, you can figure out the cosine of 2x. Just draw a right triangle and label the angle 2x and use SOHCAHTOA to figure out the remainder of these guys. Be careful with the quadrant that you're in. The point that I'm trying to make is you can either use 3 separate formulas to figure out the 3 of these, or just pick one, whichever one's your favorite, because once you have one, you really have all 3 if you have the ability to draw these right triangles and use SOHCAHTOA. Same idea on question 6. This time they're telling you the cosine of x is 4/5. They don't specify what quadrant you're in, but they do tell you that the cosecant of x is less than 0. So let's see, the cosecant of x is 1 over sine. So if cosecant is less than 0, then sine must be less than 0. So if your cosine is positive and your sine is negative, maybe you could figure out what quadrant you're in. And if you know what quadrant you're in, maybe you could figure out the sine of 2x, cosine of 2x, and tangent of 2x. Same hint as in question 5. You can either use 3 separate double angle formulas, or just figure out one of the 3, whichever one you want, and then draw your right triangle with 2x as the labeled angle in that right triangle and use SOHCAHTOA to figure out the remaining stuff. 7 is more of the same, except now they're telling you the secant value is 24 over 5, but just remember the secant is the reciprocal of cosine. So when they tell you secant is 24/5, they're really just telling you that the cosine is 5 over 24. So you know the cosine of x, maybe you can figure out the cosine of 2x using one of your double angle cosine formulas. Remember there's 3 of those, but one of those will work out especially nicely for you, although any of the 3 will get you the right answer. This is starting to feel a bit like overkill. I kind of feel like if you can do this, you can probably do question 8. So I'm going to delete question 8. You won't see this one when you get around to doing your homework. I feel like you've had plenty of practice with the double angle formulas by the time you get here. Question 9, however, switches, and now we're using the half angle formulas, and those are a little bit trickier. For question 9, they tell you that the cosecant of x is 6, and because you know that the cosecant is the reciprocal of the sine, they're really telling you that the sine of x is 1/6, and they're telling you that your angle x is between 90 and 180 degrees. A little bit weird that these are given in degrees instead of radians, but whatever, this is just telling you you're in the second quadrant. And so maybe if you know the sine of x, you can figure out the sine of x over 2, the cosine of x over 2, and the tangent of x over 2. My hint here is the same hint that I had back on these problems, where it might be easier for you to just use one half angle formula rather than using 3 separate half angle formulas. Figure out one of these 3 boxes, and then once you have one of the 3 boxes, you can figure out the remaining 2 by drawing your right triangle and labeling an angle. The angle will be x divided by 2, and using SOHCAHTOA from your answer to fill out the rest of them. You don't have to do it that way. I just think that would save you a little bit of time. When you're drawing those triangles, be careful with the signs of stuff. Pluses and minuses aren't given, so you have to consider the quadrant that you're in. One last comment is when you fill out the first one here, when you're using your half angle formula, you'll see there's a plus or minus in your half angle formula. That does not mean that there's 2 different answers here. That means that you have to figure out, based on the quadrant that you're in, whether this answer should be positive or negative. And you might be like, well, I'm in the second quadrant. Careful, you're not. X is in the second quadrant. X over 2 would be half of x. So if x is between 90 and 180, then x over 2 is between 45 and 90. What I'm saying is, although x is in the second quadrant, x divided by 2, which is what your answers will be in this box, is in the first quadrant. So I think all 3 of these answers will end up being positive. Question 10 is kind of the same idea. They give you information about the secant, which is the reciprocal of the cosine. So you can think about it like they're telling you that the cosine of x is negative 1/9. They're telling you that x is between 180 and 360 degrees, but you don't care so much about x. You care about x divided by 2. So if x is in this range, x divided by 2 is in between 90 and 180 degrees, which means x divided by 2 is in the second quadrant. So based on the fact that you're in the second quadrant, maybe you can figure out whether these should be positive or negative numbers for each of these 3 boxes. Same hint, figure out one of the 3 using a half angle formula, and then figure out the other 2 instead of using half angle formulas by drawing a triangle and using SOHCAHTOA. Another one of these, question 11, again, that's probably overkill. If you've done 9 and 10, you're probably good. So I'm going to get rid of question 11 as well. So this homework assignment, instead of having 12 problems, you'll only see 10 when you get around to doing it. This one's going to be gone. The 10th one will be the extra credit one. It gives you this huge mess, which doesn't look like anything you've done in this section. Really, it looks more like what you did in 7.1, where they gave you a big mess and you had to simplify it all the way down to a single trig function. And you're like, why are you putting a 7.1 question in the 7.2 and 7.3 homework? And it's because if you look at this, you see this 2 sine of 2t. So maybe you can use a double angle formula to rewrite this thing. And then after you rewrite this thing, you'll have some huge expression that will only involve trig functions evaluated at t. And then maybe you can simplify those using the methods of 7.1. I thought it was kind of interesting, so I tossed it on here. Nothing that you need to be able to do for this section. So do it or don't do it, totally up to you.